be talking about basically our trends in plagiarism here in our EAP program in NewFit. Before, during, and then after COVID quarantine. Not COVID itself, it still exists, but we had this period of 2 years where all of our classes were online. So I gathered some data from before we went online during that COVID quarantine, during that COVID quarantine online period, and then the 2 years after that. So 6 years total, over 3,000 participants, we could say, although, you know, they didn't necessarily elect at the time. They didn't know I was going to be doing this, but anyways, I just want to go over a brief outline of what I'll be talking about today. First, it's just the background of the program, the time period, and then also a little bit about plagiarism. I'm sure we each have our own definition, but I'll kind of give a general one as well. I'll also talk about plagiarism detection in the program that we'll be talking about today, just for the people who are a bit unaware. I see a lot of familiar faces, so many people are familiar with our plagiarism detection policy, I guess, and penalty policy, but I'll just cover it briefly. Then we'll go into what you're actually here for, the data, what were the findings, and I was actually surprised by them. And I loved your collaboration a little bit later in the Q&A. I'll go over some conclusions and then hopefully some audience participation. Hopefully I'll spark you to speak. If not, I can keep going because I'm good at that. So just to talk about the participants or the students' demographics. So it was done here at Eswag University in our foundation year program. Over the 6 years, on average, there were 621 students per year. Our highest was in the 700s and our lowest was 580, 590, around that. So on average, 621. Their ages during this academic year are generally between 16 to 20. We have some students who are 21, 22, but in general, they're 18, I guess we could say. But some high schools here end a bit earlier, so they can be as young as 16 starting the program. And they're majorly ethnically Kazakh, so they're from Kazakhstan most of the time, but they could also be Kazakhs from China or Russia or other CIS countries that also join us. And the research project is the assignment which I'm taking the data from. So the research project is a 2,500 word essay that they write over several months. So the conception of the project actually starts in the first semester. They write a proposal, and then in the second semester, they write a first draft, which they actually submit to turn it in, and then they submit the final draft. So we're only going to be talking about the final draft today. It's kind of the culmination of all of their writing, I guess. But I will put in the caveat that they've already had encounters with plagiarism detection software, and if they have been detected of using plagiarism, their teachers have told them of this and they might have made some changes. So this is not their first rodeo, I guess you could say. They're aware of our plagiarism detection and penalty system by this time. And I thought it would be good as a reflection of what they hopefully have learned, or like the results of the whole year. So this is not their first, like if they're receiving penalties, most likely they've received a penalty before with plagiarism. So the time period, so I actually started working here in 2018, the 2018-2019, do I have a little pointer? Oh yeah, 2018-2019 year, which is a perfect time to have 6 years of data. I could have, I guess, mined a little bit prior to that, but it's a bit difficult. We had a little bit of a different, it's not data collection, but recording of our plagiarism before that time period, when I thought it would be very neat to have 222. I do want to have a caveat here, though, that in the 2019-20 academic year, we did go online because of COVID in March, but the paper was hopefully mostly written by that time, and we actually had finished teaching classes by the time that we had went online. Almost finished teaching. I think we had a week or two left, but it was, I'm counting it as pre-COVID because the paper was mostly written. To talk about the differences, I guess, pre, during, and post. So pre was fully in person, no teaching that happened virtually or without teacher assistance, we could say. And we had generally students did not bring their computers to class, maybe one or two at the time. Then we moved to our quarantine era where everything was online. Our classes were synchronous. So students met on Zoom, we met them on Zoom. And because we felt we didn't have a connection with them as much, we also increased our one-on-one tutorial times. Prior to our online learning, it was 15 to 20 minutes, and we increased it to 30 minutes. So they met weekly with us for 30 minutes each to kind of balance out the lack of interaction that they had with their teacher. And then in 2022-23, we moved back into face-to-face teaching, but we still kept some of the online features in our lessons. We used Moodle heavily for kind of a flipped classroom approach. And all students have some type of electronic device in class most of the time, unless the teacher says don't bring anything. Most of the time they have computers, but they could also, or like laptops, they could also have tablets, and some which most teachers find funny, some just prefer typing and using their phone. So there's a difference in how students function as well. And I think we can maybe consider this a bit later when we talk about AI. But to move forward about plagiarism in general, which is the topic, I just give a very brief general definition of plagiarism here, which I've made up myself. I didn't use a different source because I think we all kind of have a general idea. It's copying from another source without proper attribution and modification where necessary. Of course, we don't penalize when someone uses quotation marks and cites it, right? So the modification is not necessary in that point. However, we do penalize for plagiarism if it's poor paraphrasing or summarizing. An example of this is changing just a few words, or you have independent and dependent clause and just moving the order. These in our program, we count them as plagiarism. Not every program does this, so I just wanted to highlight this. And it doesn't matter if the copying is from a human or not. If it's from a written or generated text, we count it as plagiarism. So this now includes AI. So if AI generated the text and the student used it without proper attribution or modification, then it could be counted as plagiarism. So the way we detect it, this is just very brief overview. We have full training on how to do this when you enter the program, but the student submits the research project final draft to turn it in on Moodle. Then the teacher that is assigned for that class looks at the Turnitin submission and decides what is actually plagiarism, or what we would consider plagiarism. Because if you've ever looked at Turnitin before, in our experience, usually the detected plagiarism is much higher than what we would count. For example, we don't count any like classically academic or student essay type of language. Like, the purpose of this research is to, or the authors suggest that Turnitin will highlight these things, and we don't count them. Additionally, sometimes a student has made some modifications, but not enough, and we have to decide, is this plagiarism, is it not? So that's on a teacher level. And then the final kind of step is that a senior teaching fellow or a senior tutor will kind of moderate, see how it looks, see if the whole teaching body is kind of detecting plagiarism similarly. This is just kind of like a check and balance to make sure no one's gone off the deep end, or no one's being particularly nice to Almas or whoever it is. Now we get to the part that I think interesting, the data. So I'm going to present to you 3 different graphs. The first one, I just wanted to look at what's the average amount of plagiarism in the student bodies over the time period. So we have, sorry, I'm out of the screen, but the first 2 blocks are pre, during, and then post. And as you can see, it's actually it doesn't look too bad. It seems quite low, actually. So most of our students are not being penalized for plagiarism. As you can see, if like on average, a student is in 2018, 2019 is getting 0.96% plagiarism penalty, which seems, yeah, pretty good. So the good thing, although I think we kind of think about plagiarism all the time, is that most students are not, or they we deem the amount of plagiarism is low enough not to penalize them. But we do see it's a little bit higher pre, and then it suddenly goes down a little bit during our online years. And then it kind of stays there. The strange thing about 2023, 24, we'll see a lot of weird data coming from this year, which I would love your input about, but the average is much higher. So if the average amount of plagiarism is around 2%. And the next graph will make this a little bit confusing as well, because if we take out all the students who didn't plagiarize, this is just the percentage of students, if they did receive a plagiarism penalty, how much? Mm-hmm. And if they did receive a plagiarism penalty in 23, 24, it's actually similar to the previous years besides pre-COVID. So something's going on, which I'll explain in a moment, what I think is going on. But actually, additionally, this similar to the previous graph, there's a drop somehow when we moved to online, which was a complete surprise to me. I don't know if it's a surprise to you guys. I didn't think there was a way that online could reduce plagiarism somehow, but it did. And we've maintained kind of a steady amount. So if a student was to receive a plagiarism penalty, it would be around 5% for this time. And before it was almost 10%. So something's happened, and I don't have the data for saying what's happened, but something has. I also wanted to look at what's the most common score that people get, the mode, right? So the mode, what people were, if they were receiving a penalty, yeah, the mode, if we look at all the students, is 0. But if the students receive the penalty, what is the mode? In the in the first two, which is pre-COVID quarantine, 5 or 6%, which kind of matches the higher levels of plagiarism. And then it's just 1% for the rest of the time. So a lot of people are actually receiving a low penalty for plagiarism, which is good. If we show this, I guess, to the higher ups, we actually have very low amount of plagiarism if people receive plagiarism. But what does this all mean, especially 23, 24? These are just the same two graphs as the first two. I've just put them there as a reference. There was overall a drop in plagiarism penalties during COVID, during a quarantine, during the online time. And this was kind of maintained until this previous academic year. And in the next slide, I'll go into it, but I'll give you a little hint. AI probably has some play into this. But we've kind of maintained an average from going online to this kind of hybrid mode. But what's with 23, 24? In general, if we're looking at the whole body of people who completed the research project, there was actually more people who were assigned a plagiarism penalty. That's one reason why it's higher. So let's say 1 out of 5 people, this is not correct, I'm just giving an example. 1 out of 5 people plagiarized in 2021, 2 or 3 out of 5 plagiarized in 2023, 24. That's not the correct information there, but additionally, there were more people receiving a lower score and a higher score for plagiarism in 23, 24. So though, let's say if you kind of just look at the data, people were getting like 5%, 1%, 12%. In 23, 24, people were getting 20%, like 18, 20, 25, 47%. So this is why in the first graph it's higher, because there were more people with a higher percentage, right? But the reason why it's the same in the second graph is because there was a lot more people who got plagiarism in general, but kind of at a lower range, right? That's the best way I can try to explain why the graphs are funny there in 23, 24, which kind of leads me to AI generated content. We started counting this as plagiarism in 2022, 23. As you see, there's no data prior because we weren't, I mean, ChatGPT or something like this was around, but our students weren't really using it. It wasn't really accessible. And then it kind of blew up, and other AI generated chat systems also blew up in 2022, 23 at the end of 2022, basically, right? So if this is the percentage of people in our documents for the final draft who were suspected of using AI. It's hard to say they used AI because it's very hard to detect and prove that this was AI or a student's writing, especially when their English is their third, fourth, fifth language, right? Sometimes AI is not good at reading or analyzing non-native English, right? So it was 6.23%. So out of the plagiarism, the suspected use, like out of all the students, 6.23% were suspected. This increased to 8.53 in 23-24. But I do want to say that the first draft might have cut out some of the suspected AI use, because they could rewrite some parts. But we do see an increase. It seems quite low, but also we don't look, we basically, when we're trying to identify AI, we look at Turnitin, and if Turnitin's AI is above 10%, then we start looking at it. If it's below 10%, we just leave it, because the Turnitin AI has a tendency to take topic sentences and say that that's AI, or very general language as well. So there has been an increase in AI, and this is accompanied with a decrease in the normal plagiarism. Those who are using AI, we found, are really not having issues with paraphrasing or summarizing. They're usually not getting a big penalty or any penalty for taking a text from a human writer, which is an interesting finding. And from what we know, this is just anecdotal from our program, how the students are using AI. They write something in Russian or Kazakh and get that translated using something like DeepL, which we do count as plagiarism or academic dishonesty. We would count it as plagiarism for the penalty. They also use it to paraphrase or make something sound more academic. They also use it to change their grammar, to improve their grammar. Small improvements we accept, like something like when you're typing an email, it will correct you. We allow these things. But if it's a major structural change, then we usually don't. Or just find, a lot of our students will say, oh, I was just using it to find synonyms, that's why it's flagged. So I have to include that there as well. But those are some of the things that they're using AI for. So I have two slides of conclusions. The first one is just to conclude what's here. And then the second one is kind of a little bit of moving forward. So I'd like to first say that the plagiarism penalties have been reduced since going online and then online to hybrid, which I think is very interesting. If you have any insights on that, I would love to hear about it in just a second. And 23, 24 is where we might see some changes, which will be reflected in the future, potentially because of AI, because there's more AI use, or at least the penalty for AI is larger or is increasing, right? I can't say they're definitely using it, you know, that type of thing. And there's more students with higher penalties. So there's more students plagiarizing, and more of them have higher penalties. And the most, but the most common penalty is quite low. We're not seeing everybody getting 20% plagiarism penalty at the end of the academic year, which is great for the program, but also not so good that they are receiving plagiarism penalty in general. Also, moving forward, I just wanted to touch upon why, what literature says about why students are plagiarizing, which actually I think is quite common, or like you would already know. The first being, it's so easy. The computer is there. It's very easy to just copy and paste. It's not like it's from a written text where you actually have to do some writing to transfer it. It's very easy because it's just one click or two little keystrokes. Another one is time constraints, whether it's because of the limit of the project or students' love for postponing things, including myself. And the third, a belief that they will not get caught, which, although this research was done in 2015, I think is applicable to AI now, because I believe many students think it's not easily detectable, so they can kind of defend themselves a little bit easier, which is true. I was also looking into what can we do? What's suggested things that people are saying out there. And this research in 2024, which was specifically about AI, was talking about, you know, how to prevent it, or prevent, not in total, but how much the institution wants to prevent it. And they wrote something very interesting, that usually societies that have a large power distance are usually more masculine based and long-term oriented, usually have more success with implementing and following AI policy, or any type of policy, I guess. And luckily or unluckily, Kazakhstan falls into large power distance, masculine, collective, long-term societies, right? So if, I'm not saying that this must be done, but if penalties were enforced, or the policies were well known, then it, as this research states, you might see more success in actually the following of those policies. So hopefully this next academic year we'll have some clear explanatory sessions for not only students but also teaching fellows on what our policy is, which we worked together last year to make one for our program. And hopefully this, along with, you know, the masculine nature of the society, the collective nature of the society, will help in reducing AI in the ways that we wish. Yeah, not completely reducing it or eliminating it altogether. That's a bit too far. I have some questions, and I realized this morning that the second question is a little bit confusing, so just read the first one for a second. But why was there a drop in plagiarism when we moved into online? I don't have an answer myself. I didn't do any interviews with teachers to find out. And the second one, the question is a bit confusing, but what I actually mean is, does the increase in AI plagiarism in 2023-24 indicate more silent that we don't know about AI use, right? Because it's difficult to find and collect. I'm sorry, I must have been in a different planet when I wrote the second question. It's a bit confusing. I do have a reference list. It's quite short. I didn't want to get too much into the background. Thank you very much. If you have any questions or you want to follow up with any of these, I'm definitely available here. Thank you.